So, President Trump's taxes are likely to be one of many topics addressed in tomorrow night's first presidential debate. With just 36 days until the election, the president and his Democratic rival, Joe Biden, will face off on issues including, of course, the coronavirus pandemic, race and violence, and, of course, the Supreme Court. The debate will look a little different, though, this year, with just one moderator and a limited audience to allow for social distancing. Let us dig into it. We want to bring in Ed O'Keefe. Ed, you are in Cleveland. Okay, so we probably would have started talking about something else, but we got to talk about this New York Times article first off. And, you know, here's what I thought when I read it. Yes, you know, it was shocking, but I also thought we've heard these allegations before. The New York Times did a similar story in 2016. Michael Cohen has, you know, spoken about the president's penchant for inflating and deflating the value of his properties to make it more advantageous on his tax returns. The question really is the reaction of his base. Is this article likely to have any sort of impact on the people who are supporting him now?
People who are supporting him now, probably not, but you never know. There could be other some folks out there who say, you know, this is a bridge too far. But this is, as you said, been hinted at and has been reported on in the past with fewer documented instances of his tax returns. The fact that there's now 20 years worth is telling and certainly paints a fuller picture. But, you know, we'll see over the next few days what potential impact it might have. I think it's telling that very quickly after that report came out yesterday afternoon, the Biden campaign was out very quickly with advertising, with campaign buttons even, designed to sort of draw attention to it. Buttons they're selling now on their campaign website that say, I pay more in income taxes than Donald Trump. And advertising that uses the sort of average tax burden of certain working class Americans against the president's $750 in income tax back in 2017. So, you know, if anything, this is grist for the mill, but it's probably not enough necessarily to really sway many people. And it's not because it's not important. It's not because it's unprecedented. It's because our polling has shown consistently that there is a very small percentage of people left in this country, very small percentages in the key battleground states that have yet to make up their minds. So maybe it sways those few undecided, uncommitted people. Maybe it changes the minds of some Trump supporters. But history has shown when these news reports come out, they're interesting, they dominate the conversation for a few days, and then we all just move on because of the crush of headlines that continue on all fronts.
You know, I suspect your analysis is spot on, Ed. And you know, it's interesting. There's a key sort of line in the New York Times report that quotes from President Trump's book, The Art of the Deal. And it says this: I play to people's fantasies. People want to believe that something is the biggest and the greatest and the most spectacular. I call it truthful hyperbole. It's an innocent form of exaggeration and a very effective form of promotion. Now, nobody may care about the president's taxes, as Anne-Marie says. A lot of this has already been somewhat in the news cycle. There was no verification the way that the New York Times was able to gather. But the question becomes, does this innocent hyperbole, this form of exaggeration, put people's lives at risk when we're talking about the coronavirus, when we're talking about geopolitical threats like North Korea? And I wonder if that is where the Biden campaign will focus their response on this report as we prepare for this debate tomorrow, as opposed to specifically talking about the taxes. It speaks to sort of a larger issue that they may have an opportunity to exploit.
Well, yeah, and it speaks, you know, they will focus on the bald unfairness of it in their view. They will focus on the fact that the tax system is, you know, built to give advantage to higher income Americans like the president, who can take advantage of loopholes that allowed him to pay so little. There are some who are making the national security argument that to have a president who is personally liable for about $300 million in debt that's coming due over the next 4 years is potentially dangerous for the country, because he may, his thinking, his decisions may be clouded by his own personal financial state. We'll see how or if that argument is made either by Biden or by others, but certainly that's one factor that's out there.
I want to ask you about a couple of pretty tight races. New CBS News Battleground Tracker shows that the president and his Democratic rival are in tight races in some key battleground states, North Carolina and Georgia among them. How might the candidates use the debate to boost their standings in those states? I'm curious with, what you said about how so many people have already made a decision. What sort of impact these debates could have?
Yeah, the other element of that is so many people have made up their decision, but not everyone. And so they're after that small percentage of people who haven't or who could still be persuaded to go either way. So, a lot of it will be how they are able to respond to the questions early on in the event. This first debate, if we call them a debate, some call them a joint appearance, is usually the highest rated because it's the first opportunity to see the two of them one-on-one, face-to-face. Remember, for Democrats especially, this has been a key thought or key moment in the minds of many over the last 4 years is who will get to go on stage and take it mano a mano with the president? What will Biden do or say potentially to knock him off his game? How many times have we heard over the course of the 2020 Democratic primary, well, I like them, but I just can't see them on stage with the president because apparently the debate for so many Democrats at least was going to be a cathartic moment for them, even if it isn't an actual talent that you need to have to be president. But both of them will have opportunities here to raise concerns about the other guy and potentially to explain what they would do as president on a host of issues. Remember, 6 topics tomorrow night: the Supreme Court, the economy, the pandemic, race and violence in the nation's cities, and that whole reckoning with race that's ongoing and policing, their own records, and then the integrity of the elections. Lots of ground to cover over 90 minutes. They will be on stage with the moderator, Chris Wallace, and they will be the only 3 people in the room tomorrow night not wearing these medical masks that are required as we're here to witness this debate. No opening statements, no closing statements, and the Commission on Presidential Debates says that because of all these social distancing guidelines and the steps being taken to keep everyone safe, there are no plans for a handshake.
Ed, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as you know, is preparing lawmakers for the possibility that neither candidate wins an outright Electoral College victory, which hasn't happened since 1876. Now, people may not understand this. If you're a Democrat, you may think, well, that makes it good for the Democrats because the Democrats control the House of Representatives. But in fact, the presidency will be ultimately decided by the party that controls more delegates. So explain that to our viewers, and how important would that make some local races?
Yeah, this is one of those scenarios that's interesting to think about, that we should be aware of. But it's the kind of scenario that gives aspirin a headache, okay? And this only happens if there's a tie in the Electoral College or other issues remain disputed. It hasn't happened since 1876. That's the first number to remember. So it would be a long time since it's had to happen. The other number to remember, 26 and 22. You look at the 50 states, 26 of them have predominantly Republican congressional delegations in the House of Representatives. 22 of them have predominantly Democratic delegations to the House of Representatives. 2 states, Pennsylvania and Michigan, effectively have a tie, equal number of Republicans and Democrats. Under this scenario, the House would gather, each state gets 1 vote. Who should be president? So in those Republican-dominant states, conceivably, it's President Trump. In the Democrat-dominant states, it's potentially Joe Biden. In those divided states of Michigan and Pennsylvania, could be a jump ball. Others will argue, look, if you have a predominantly Republican congressional delegation, but Biden won the state, shouldn't you reflect the will of the people? We'll see. Again, scenarios that we may or may not have to get into. We talked about this 4 years ago, too, because in the incredibly polarized times we live in, an Electoral College tie is, believe it or not, a possibility. So what Pelosi has done here is sort of reminded her Democratic colleagues this could be something we have to worry about. Start thinking about it. Start thinking about how you might have to pressure your colleagues on the other side of the aisle to vote for Biden instead of Trump, and just be aware of it. But we're not under any situation right now where we believe this is possible. If it is, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, you're so right about this, but you know what? I'm through over the last 3 or 4 years thinking that things might not happen, because never thought that we'd impeach a president, never thought that 200,000 people would be dead from the coronavirus back in February. I mean, every month it seems as if we say, you know, it's probably not going to happen, and then circumstances arise that have us rethinking what we thought possible.
The beauty of our system is that all of those scenarios are laid out in the Constitution. And we've lived through so many of those obscure elements of the Constitution over the last 4 years. Why not throw in 1 or 2 more? We'll see.
We'll see. Ed, thank you. I didn't get a chance to ask you how the candidates were preparing, Ed. Perhaps we'll talk about that tomorrow, because it is interesting that some people have criticized Joe Biden for calling what's known in the business as a lid, where the vice president isn't making himself available to the press or to the folks. And yesterday, President Trump seemed to indicate that his preparation was just in jousting with the press. So it's kind of interesting the way that the two are going about it. But as usual, Ed, we appreciate your reporting and we appreciate your analysis, my friend. Thank you very much.
See you soon.
All right. And we will have a special preview of the first presidential debate tomorrow night on Red and Blue at 5 and at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And we will carry the entire debate and have a wrap of all the top moments at 11 p.m. right here on CBSN.